My name is Claire Reynolds, and I can still hear the sound of that paper bag crinkling in my daughter's hands. It wasn't the weight of it, there was hardly anything inside that made my stomach knot. It was the words scrawled across a crooked sticky note in black marker, "Try harder next year." The handwriting was unmistakable, my sister's. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in early March at a birthday party that looked like it belonged on the front page of some glossy lifestyle blog. Her backyard was draped in pastel bunting tables lined with desserts so elaborate you'd think each cupcake had its own PR agent. There were helium balloons clustered in perfect color palettes, a photo booth with props and matching Born to Shine t-shirts on the birthday kids. I stood off to the side with my husband pretending to make small talk, but my eyes kept finding my daughter 7 years old, quiet in big groups, wearing the glittery headband she'd chosen herself that morning. She called it her galaxy crown. She had practiced saying happy birthday twice in the car, made 2 hand-drawn cards with stars, and signed them with love. That's who she is, thoughtful, careful, trying her best. When the gift bags were handed out, I saw the other kids clutching theirs like treasure chests, custom water bottles, bubble wands, stuffed animals, each with glittery name tags. Then my daughter got hers, a plain white sack. No name, no sparkle, just that note taped crooked across the front. Inside a broken crayon, a worn-out eraser, a peppermint that looked like it had been rattling around at the bottom of someone's purse. Her little fingers fumbled inside, as if maybe she'd find something more at the bottom. Then she looked at me. That moment burned itself into me, her eyes asking, did I do something wrong? Before I could answer, my sister laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. She's been acting out lately, she said, waving it off like it was cute, interrupting talking back. This is just a little wake-up call. My mother chuckled, my father smirked. The adults joined in. Even the kids laughed without knowing why. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I didn't make a scene. My husband crouched down, took the bag from my daughter's hands, and said gently, "You don't need this. Let's go get some real cake." We stood, took her hands, and walked out. No one stopped us. No one called after us. And here's the thing, walking away didn't feel like defeat. It felt like lighting a match to a bridge that had been rotting for years. I knew something had broken for good in that moment, but I didn't yet realize just how far this would go, or how much it would change the course of our lives. If you've ever been in a moment where your child's dignity was on the line, you know there's a point where silence speaks louder than any outburst. And if you've ever stood at that point, you'll understand what I'm about to share. If you've ever been in a moment like that, where you had to choose between swallowing your pride or standing up for someone you love, leave a like and let's walk through this together. We didn't leave in a rush. We didn't slam any doors or throw around accusations. We simply walked out into the crisp March air, our daughter's small hand tucked between mine and my husband's, like we were leading her out of a burning building. No one followed us. Not my sister, not my parents. They stayed inside, probably already moving on to cake and photos, maybe even laughing about how dramatic we were being. I didn't care. The silence from behind us was louder than anything they could have said. We reached our car, and my daughter climbed into the back seat without a word. She held those birthday cards she'd made for her cousins, still sealed in their little handmade envelopes, close to her chest. I saw her glance at the gift bag one last time before my husband, without saying a word, tossed it into a trash bin at the curb. The drive home felt longer than it should have. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, watching her trace the glittery stars she'd drawn on those cards. She didn't cry. That almost made it worse. Kids shouldn't have to learn so young how to swallow pain just to keep the peace. When we got home, she curled up on the couch under the soft throw blanket my husband had given her last Christmas, the one stitched with the words, "You are safe. You are strong. You are loved." I made tea in the kitchen, the kettle hissing softly in the background, while my husband sat beside her, one arm draped protectively around her small shoulders. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. This wasn't new. It was just final. I think deep down I'd been bracing for this moment for years. My family had always known how to find the smallest crack in me and press until it hurt. But this time it wasn't me they'd chosen to humiliate, it was my daughter. That was the line I couldn't let them cross again. After she drifted off to sleep, still holding those cards in her hands, my husband looked at me across the room. His voice was steady. I paused the payments, he said. I knew what he meant. The rent supplement for my sister's house, the grocery cart I kept loaded for my parents, the little transfers to cover their utility bills. I nodded, walked to the drawer where I kept an old accordion folder, and pulled it out. Inside was years' worth of quiet documentation, text messages, asking for money screenshots of promises to pay it back soon. That never happened. Even the email from my sister begging me to watch her kids for a week so she could go on a solo reset trip. The folder was thick, heavier than it looked. I flipped to the very front and slid in one more piece, that crooked sticky note from the gift bag. Try harder next year. I slipped it into a plastic sleeve so it wouldn't tear. There it was, years of exploitation, manipulation, and disrespect distilled into a single insulting message handed to my child. My husband watched me do it. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe we should think this through." He just nodded once, like we'd both arrived at the same conclusion without needing to speak it aloud. We stayed up late, not talking about what we'd do next, so much as letting the decision settle in. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finally stepping out of the role they'd assigned me since I was a kid. The one who gave, who endured, who never made trouble. I knew the fallout would be ugly. People like my family don't take well to losing control. But I also knew this. I'd rather face their rage than let my daughter grow up thinking this was normal. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the quiet of our home wrapping around me like armor. My daughter was sleeping peacefully down the hall, unaware that a storm was about to break. But this time, I wasn't afraid of it. This time, I was ready. Because once you see the fire for what it is, you stop trying to put it out with your bare hands. You walk away, and you make sure it can't burn you again. It's strange how quickly the present can pull you back into the past. One moment I was tucking my daughter in, the next, I was 10 years old again, standing in our old kitchen with my report card in hand, waiting for someone to notice. Emma, my younger sister, had been the golden child for as long as I could remember. No one ever said it outright, but you didn't have to. It was in the way my parents' voices lit up when she spoke, even when she was telling some dull story about gym class, while my news about making honor roll was met with a distracted, "That's nice." I remember third grade vividly. I'd fought through colds, headaches, and stomach aches to earn a perfect attendance certificate. I came home proud, holding that paper like it was a trophy. My mom glanced at it, barely pausing before saying, "Emma got Student of the Month. You know, that's a much bigger deal." It wasn't just academics. When I got the lead in the school play, they didn't come. Emma had a volleyball practice game, not even a tournament, but apparently it was important to her. Birthdays were the worst. My parties were always joint celebrations with Emma, even though we were nearly 2 months apart. One year, my name was scrawled so small on the cake it looked like an afterthought. That same year, we were given one present to share, a pair of rollerblades, in Emma's size. It was never about bruises or shouting matches. It was the steady hum of not measuring up. Too quiet, too dramatic, too shy, too opinionated. I cried too easily. I asked too many questions. I didn't smile enough, or I smiled the wrong way. And when I noticed the imbalance when I tried to talk about it, I was told I was being too sensitive. At 15, I came home in tears after being accused of cheating on a test I hadn't cheated on. My mother's response: "Well, you do keep to yourself a lot. Maybe you look suspicious. Next time, try to smile more and act normal." By 17, I'd finally worked up the courage to tell my parents I thought I might be depressed. My mom rolled her eyes. "That's the new trend, isn't it? Everyone thinks they're depressed. They're just bored. Find a hobby." Emma called me dramatic, then borrowed my phone charger and never gave it back. By the time I left for college, I had stopped expecting anything from them. They didn't show up for move-in day. A week later, I got a card in the mail with $25 inside and a sticky note that said, "Don't blow it." For years, I told myself their neglect was just a quirk, a personality flaw. I softened the truth when I told my husband about it, made it sound eccentric instead of hurtful. But that night after the party, sitting on the couch with the folder of proof in my lap, I knew I couldn't downplay it anymore. The way they treated me wasn't just in the past. It had seeped into the present, spilling over onto my daughter. The same cold dismissals, the same sarcastic barbs, the same feeling of being an outsider in your own family, she was tasting it now. And that's when the fear that had lived in me for decades shifted into something else entirely. Anger, yes, but also clarity. I could trace the pattern, see every turn it had taken, every place it had left its mark on me. And I knew exactly where it was heading if I didn't stop it. It hit me in a way that was almost physical. Protecting her meant breaking the cycle. No more swallowing insults, no more hoping they'd change. No more telling myself that family is complicated as an excuse to let them chip away at her the way they chipped away at me. That night, as my husband closed the folder and set it on the coffee table, I realized I had already made the choice. This wasn't going to be another wound I learned to live with. This was going to be the line I drew in permanent ink. I didn't know yet what the next steps would look like, or how ugly it would get. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my daughter was never going to have to wonder if she was enough. Not while I was still breathing. When I met Daniel, my husband, I was still carrying the weight of those years, even if I didn't fully realize it. Back then, I thought it was normal to apologize for existing too loudly. I apologized for crying during movies, for asking for help, for wanting something just for myself. That's the thing about growing up in a home where you're never quite enough. You learn to shrink before anyone asks you to. The first time I cried in front of Daniel, it was during a movie we watched on his battered old couch. I immediately apologized, fumbling for a tissue, embarrassed at being too much. He didn't make it a moment. He just handed me the tissue and said, "That scene really hit, huh?" Like it was the most natural thing in the world. No judgment, no lecture about being stronger, just understanding. He was also the first person who ever asked me what I actually wanted for my birthday, and then got it right. Not because he guessed, but because he listened. It wasn't expensive or flashy. It was a signed copy of a book I'd loved as a child, but lost in one of our family's many moves. He had hunted it down, wrapped it in brown paper, and given it to me with a simple, "I thought you might like this" back. That's when I started to realize how low my bar for kindness had been set. It's dangerous living too long with people who mistake control for care. You stop recognizing what real care looks like. When our daughter was born, I thought maybe this was my chance to rewrite everything. I wanted her to have what I never did: grandparents who showed up, family traditions worth keeping, a web of relatives who loved her just because she was hers. Against my better judgment, I opened the door to my family again. At first it was small things. My sister made little comments about her outfits. "She dresses a bit different, doesn't she?" My mother insisted she give hugs on command. "Don't be rude, sweetie. Give Uncle Pete a proper hug." My father teased her for crying at loud noises. "She'll need to toughen up if she wants to survive in this family." I tried to explain patiently at first that she had sensory processing challenges, that she wasn't shy, she was careful, that she needed understanding, not ridicule. They rolled their eyes, waved me off, called me overreactive. My sister accused me of being a snowplow parent, said I was raising a pushover. And every time I pushed back, I became the problem. Difficult, dramatic, oversensitive. The labels they'd once used on me slipped easily into place again, like they'd been waiting for their turn. The worst part wasn't what they said, it was how familiar it all felt. The cold shoulders, the dismissive smirks, the moments they acted like they pitied me. Sometimes they didn't even address me directly, speaking about me to each other, as if I wasn't in the room. I overheard my mother once leaning into my sister and whispering, "She just wants to feel important. Let her have this," as if defending my child was a phase I'd eventually grow out of. I let too many moments slide. I told myself they weren't that bad, that they didn't mean harm, that family dynamics are messy. I let it go more times than I could count, clinging to the faint hope that if I just modeled enough kindness, they'd eventually reflect it back. But hope without boundaries is a dangerous thing. And on that day at the party, watching my daughter clutch a cheap gift bag, like it might explain something, I understood that I'd been wrong. They weren't going to change, not for me, not for her. That was the moment the quiet resolve inside me hardened. I could either keep giving them access to her, or I could end it. This time there was no hesitation. I chose her. I chose me. And in choosing us, I knew I was choosing war. The morning after the party, the air in our house felt heavier, like the weight of a decision was pressing down on every wall. My daughter was still asleep, her hair a tangle on the pillow, clutching the handmade cards she never got to give. My husband was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee, his expression steady but unreadable. He didn't start with small talk. I've paused everything he said. I didn't need him to elaborate. The rent supplement we'd been sending my sister each month, the prepaid grocery card I kept loaded for my parents, the payments toward their overdue utility bills, all of it stopped. I walked to the living room and pulled open the bottom drawer of the old oak cabinet. That's where I kept the folder. It had started years ago, almost by accident, saving receipts, printing emails, screenshotting texts. A part of me must have known this day would come, that one day I'd need more than just my memory to prove the truth. The folder was thick now. Inside were Venmo transactions where I covered my parents' property taxes after they said they'd pay me back after the cruise. There was the email where my sister begged me to watch her kids for a week so she could go on a solo reset trip. Photos from family events I hadn't been invited to. Screenshots of group chats where my name came up as a punchline. I laid it all out on the table, the paper edges curling slightly from years of being tucked away. Then I added one last piece, the crooked, sticky note from the gift bag. Try harder next year. I slid it into a clear sleeve right at the front like a title page. My husband stood beside me looking at the pile. You sure, he asked, not like he doubted me, but like he wanted me to hear my own answer. I've never been more sure, I said. We didn't talk about it in terms of revenge. This was about severing the last threads they still used to pull us in. It was about telling them without saying it that they no longer had any claim on our time, our money, or our lives. We agreed there would be no warning, no dramatic confrontation. Just the truth delivered plainly. If they wanted to teach my daughter a lesson, then fine, they were about to learn one too. That afternoon I gathered everything into one neat stack, clipped it together, and tied it with a crimson ribbon I found in the junk drawer. It struck me later that the ribbon had come from one of my sister's kids' birthday presents. It felt fitting, like closing a loop I hadn't realized was still open. We printed a short cover page, just a simple statement of facts, no editorializing, no insults. Then we placed the folder into a large envelope. The weight of it was almost satisfying, like holding the sum of every moment they'd tried to make me feel small. The plan was simple. We'd drive to her house early the next morning before anyone was awake, leave the envelope on the doormat, ring the bell, and walk away. No explanations, no waiting around to see her reaction. It wasn't about watching her crumble, it was about finally stepping outside of the cycle. The rest of the evening was quiet. My daughter woke briefly, padding into the kitchen for a glass of water. She didn't ask about the party. She didn't ask about her aunt. She just climbed into my lap and rested her head on my shoulder. I held her for a long time, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. And in that stillness, I knew protecting her was worth every storm that was about to come. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't shouting in the middle of the party. It's walking away with your head high and your hands full of truth. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and someone else's approval, you know exactly what I mean. Share your own moment in the comments, because these are the stories that remind us we're not alone. And if you believe in protecting your peace, even when it costs you everything, stay with me. The next part is where the real storm begins. The next morning, the sun hadn't even broken the horizon when we loaded into the car. The envelope sat between us on the center console, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. My husband drove without saying much, the hum of the tires on the asphalt filling the silence. I kept my hands clasped in my lap, trying to steady the adrenaline that had been building since last night. Her street was still and quiet, the kind of early morning where even the birds haven't decided to start. We pulled up to the curb in front of her house, the lights inside still off. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my cheeks, and walked up to the door. My husband followed, envelope in hand. He bent down, placed it squarely in the center of the doormat, and pressed the doorbell. We didn't linger. By the time we reached the car, the sound hit us sharp, guttural, and unrestrained. A scream that ripped through the stillness like glass shattering on tile. My husband's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but there was the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her face. Later, I'd learned that the scream was loud enough to draw her neighbor outside in his robe. He assumed someone was hurt and called the police. By the time they arrived, she was on the lawn clutching the folder like it was radioactive. She told them it was harassment, that her crazy sister was trying to ruin her life. They flipped through the pages, calm as ever, and told her it was a civil matter, nothing illegal, nothing worth escalating. This, one of them said, is just the truth. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. 38 messages from my sister. The first few were written in all caps, dripping with rage. What is wrong with you? You think this is funny, then came the guilt. We are family. You can't do this to us. Then the begging. Please, you can't just stop paying like this because of a joke. And finally, the threats. If you don't take this back, you'll regret it. I didn't respond. Instead, I drafted a single email and attached a digital copy of the folder. I sent it to every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family with a plain subject line, in case you ever wondered why we stopped showing up. No commentary, no explanation. The replies trickled in over the afternoon. Half of them were some version of "I had no idea." One cousin wrote just 4 words, "Good for you." A few stayed silent, and I knew which side they'd chosen. Meanwhile, I could imagine the chaos unfolding on her end. The landlord would have been informed by now that the rent supplement was gone. The car loan company, already jittery from her past late payments, would be sending notices. Each thread I'd been holding quietly had been cut, and she was just starting to feel the drop. The calls from my parents began that evening. 4 times my mother rang before leaving a voicemail. "You've taken this too far. This family has always had problems, but you just lit a match. What do you want from us?" She sounded more angry than sorry. My father's voice came next, more restrained, but laced with that familiar disappointment. "Call us back. We can work this out." But this wasn't about working it out. This was about ending it. I sat at the kitchen table, my daughter in the next room, humming softly as she colored. I looked at my phone, listened to the silence after the voicemail ended, and felt the strangest thing: peace. It's not the kind of peace that comes when everyone forgives and forgets. It's the kind that comes when you finally stop letting someone hold the pen to your life story. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't owe them an ending they approved of. I owed my daughter a future they couldn't touch. The fallout didn't take long to become real. Within 2 weeks, the first cracks in their carefully maintained facade began to show. My sister's landlord sent her a formal notice 30 days to pay the full rent or face eviction. The car loan company flagged her account, warning that her late payments had triggered a review. I didn't have to imagine her panic. I knew exactly how she handled financial stress. She'd get angry first, then desperate, then manipulative. Sure enough, my parents called again, but this time they didn't call me. They called Daniel. "She won't listen to us," my mother said, her voice a mix of irritation and false sorrow. "Maybe she'll listen to you. Tell her we're sorry. Tell her she doesn't have to do this." Daniel didn't flinch. "She's not doing this to you," he said evenly. "You did it to yourselves." They showed up the next morning. I saw them from the living room window before they even reached the porch. My daughter was sitting beside me, flipping through a picture book, when her gaze followed mine. The color drained from her face. "Are they mad?" she asked quietly. "They're loud," I said. "That's not the same thing." When the knock came, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, leaving Daniel and our daughter inside. "We just want to talk," my dad said, holding his hands out in that way he always did when he wanted to appear reasonable. "This is getting out of hand." "No," I told him, my voice steady. "This is called consequences." My mother's eyes welled, but the tears never fell. "We miss our family," she said, as if the sentiment alone could erase years of harm. "I didn't invite them in." After a few moments of tense silence, they left a card in the mailbox, a generic sympathy card. Inside, in my mother's neat handwriting, it read, "We miss our family." I slid it back into the envelope, scribbled a sticky note, "So did I," and dropped it into their mailbox on my way to pick up groceries later that afternoon. That evening, Daniel suggested ice cream. Not to celebrate, there wasn't anything joyful about this kind of severing, but to breathe. We drove to a little shop across town, the kind with hand-painted signs and creaky wooden booths. My daughter ordered a double scoop of mint chocolate chip, her favorite, and for the first time in days, I saw her shoulders relax. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There was something unspoken in the air, a mutual recognition that we'd crossed a line we could never uncross, and that was exactly how it needed to be. Back home, after she'd gone to bed, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle. The phone stayed silent for the rest of the night. No calls, no texts, no last-ditch attempts at guilt. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Daniel moving around in the kitchen. For years, I'd feared that cutting ties would feel like freefall, that without their approval I'd be untethered. But it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like planting both feet firmly on the ground after standing on a shaky ledge for too long. If you've ever had to take that step to finally remove yourself from people who will never respect your boundaries, you know it's not about winning or losing. It's about breathing again. If that's you, drop a comment below and share your moment, because someone else needs to know it's possible. That night I slept without waking once. My dreams weren't vivid. They were simply quiet. And when I woke the next morning, I realized that was the gift I'd been chasing all along. Not their acceptance, not their apologies, just peace. 10 days after we'd left that envelope on her doorstep, I thought maybe the message had finally sunk in. The phone had been mostly quiet, the social media posts had slowed. I let myself believe that silence meant acceptance. I was wrong. That Tuesday, my daughter came home from school with something tucked into her backpack. At first, I thought it was a drawing or a note from one of her friends, but when she pulled it out, I froze. It was a pastel-colored piece of stationery, the kind with little hearts along the border. Across the top in handwriting I knew as well as my own were the words, "If you ever feel sad or confused, remember Auntie loves you. You can call me anytime, even if your mom says no." My daughter's eyes searched mine, puzzled. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. I could feel the fury rising in my throat, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't just boundary pushing. This was calculated. It was an attempt to undermine me, to plant a seed in my daughter's mind, that my love came with conditions while hers did not. I asked her calmly where she'd gotten it. She told me her aunt had dropped it off at school. No, she hadn't seen her, someone else had handed it to her teacher from a family friend. I didn't waste a second. I called the school, my voice clipped and clear. It didn't take long to piece it together. My sister had used the name of one of her friends to gain access to the front office, claiming she needed to leave something for her niece. No ID check, no verification, just a smile and a name. That afternoon, I filed a formal no-contact order with the school and the district, making it clear that under no circumstances was she or anyone on my parents' behalf to approach my daughter on school grounds. Then I called the police and added an official cease and desist to the pile of paperwork that was quickly becoming its own folder. When Daniel got home and I told him, he didn't raise his voice. He just listened, his jaw tightening. "She's not going to stop unless she's made to," he said. He was right. 2 days later, a fake account began tagging me on social media, calling me ungrateful, posting blurry childhood photos of me with captions like, "Some people forget who raised them." Then came the direct messages. "Just remember, kids grow up one day. She'll know what you did." It was pathetic, but it was also a new low. My sister wasn't just lashing out, she was trying to rewrite the story before my daughter was old enough to understand it. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. He didn't hesitate. "We're past warnings," he said. "This goes to law enforcement." That night I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed watching her sleep. The fairy lights we'd strung over her headboard cast a soft glow on her face. She looked peaceful, safe, and I knew in my bones that's exactly what my sister wanted to fracture. It's a strange thing realizing that someone who shares your blood can look at your child and see not a person to protect, but a pawn to use. I pulled the blanket up over her shoulders, smoothing it gently, and whispered a promise I intended to keep, not on my watch. In that moment, I stopped hoping my sister or my parents would ever understand. This wasn't about changing them anymore, it was about fortifying us. And if that meant cutting every single remaining thread between our lives, so be it. I closed her bedroom door quietly and went to join Daniel in the kitchen. "It's time," I said simply. He didn't ask time for what, he just nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say the words. Once the cease and desist was in place, I thought maybe she'd take the hint. But with my family, silence is never the end. It's just the pause before the next act. A week later, my cousin sent me a screenshot from Facebook. It was my sister's profile, though the post had clearly been crafted for maximum sympathy. She'd uploaded a crying selfie, her eyes red, cheeks streaked with mascara, captioned, "When your family turns on you, there's nothing left but heartbreak." The comments section was flooded with the usual chorus, friends and distant relatives offering prayers, strangers telling her to stay strong, and one or two digs about selfish people forgetting their roots. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't have to. The truth had a way of leaking out on its own. It started with one aunt, then a cousin, then another, people who'd seen the folder I'd sent. They began quietly posting pieces of the evidence in comment threads. Screenshots of text messages, excerpts from emails, even the voice memo from Christmas 2 years ago when my mother told my sister not to bother getting me anything nice because she never appreciates it anyway. I didn't engage, but I watched from the sidelines as her narrative began to unravel. The sympathy comments slowed. Some disappeared entirely. My sister deactivated her account within 48 hours. My parents didn't take it well. They tried to rally the extended family with an emergency Zoom call, something we'd never done before. I didn't attend, but I heard from a relative afterward what happened. Someone asked why I hadn't been invited to Grandpa's birthday last year. My mother froze. Another relative asked about the family emergency fund, why Emma had been dipping into it when she was the only one with consistent income. A third brought up the birthday party incident, directly asking if the story circulating was true. It was. By the end of that call, 4 people had quietly exited the meeting. Photos from family events stopped appearing online. The air in our extended circle had shifted. People were beginning to see patterns that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in our mailbox. My mother's handwriting on the envelope written in blue ink on her personalized stationery. I opened it slowly, half expecting an apology, though I should have known better. Family is complicated, it began. We made mistakes, but at the end of the day, we're all we've got. Don't punish everyone forever over one misunderstanding. Your daughter will regret the distance, and so will you. No acknowledgement of the hurt they'd caused, no ownership of their actions. Just an attempt to guilt me into reopening the door. I read it once, folded it neatly, and slid it into a frame. I hung it on the wall in my home office right next to the sticky note that started it all. Try harder next year. That evening, as I passed by that wall, I realized something important. Those 2 pieces of paper told the entire story without a single embellishment. One was the act, the other was the denial. Together, they were the perfect reminder of why the door had to stay closed. Daniel noticed it too. He didn't comment, just smiled faintly when he saw where I'd placed them. Some wounds heal best when you stop touching them. Others, you keep in plain sight, not because you can't move on, but because you need to remember exactly what you survived. I knew this wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, I also knew it didn't matter what their next move was. The control they'd had over me all my life was gone, and nothing they could say or do would bring it back. The change in my daughter was the first real sign that we were moving in the right direction. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. Subtle. The kind of shift you only notice when you've been watching someone carry invisible weight for too long. She started sleeping through the night without waking from those restless, whimpering dreams. Her shoulders always slightly hunched as if bracing for something began to relax. She made 2 new friends in her art class, girls who didn't laugh when she needed earplugs for assemblies or asked for quiet time during group work. One Saturday morning, we went shopping for her new bed. She picked out soft fairy lights that shifted between colors like they were breathing. That night we strung them above her headboard. The glow they cast made her room feel warm in a way it hadn't before, like it was hers, truly hers. A week later, her school held a family day. Each student could invite one adult to share cookies and walk through their art projects. She didn't hesitate when the teacher asked who she'd like to bring. My mom, she said as if there were no other possible answer. Her project was a painting abstract swirls of purples and pinks flecked with tiny white stars. In the corner in careful black paint, she had written "Safe is better than big." I asked her what it meant. She shrugged like it was obvious. Big family, big house, big events. They're not always safe. I like safe better. We stopped for ice cream on the way home. She ordered mint chocolate chip, and halfway through the cone, she looked up at me and said, "You did the right thing. Even if they say you're mean, even if they never talk to us again." My throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything." And it did. Because in that moment, I knew she understood not all the details, not the years of history, but the core truth. That I'd chosen her over keeping the peace with people who didn't deserve it. That night after she went to bed, I sat in the living room with Daniel. "I think she's going to be okay," I said quietly. He smiled. "So are you." Maybe he was right. The next morning, I checked my email before work. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from Emma. No subject line, no greeting. Just 6 words, "Are you happy now you won?" I didn't reply, because she was wrong. This wasn't about winning. I hadn't beaten her in some twisted game. I'd walked away from the game entirely. And that to me was the only victory that mattered. Still, her words lingered in my mind throughout the day, not because I doubted myself, but because they were such a perfect snapshot of how she saw the world. Everything was a competition, a scoreboard, a tally of who had the upper hand. There was no room for connection in a mindset like that. That night, I took one last look at the framed sticky note and the letter from my mother before heading to bed. They didn't hurt to see anymore. If anything, they steadied me. They were reminders that I'd finally learned the difference between letting go and giving up. Letting go was a choice. Giving up was what I'd been taught to do my whole life. Give up my boundaries, my needs, my self-respect, to keep everyone else comfortable. I wasn't doing that anymore. If you've ever had to walk away from people who refuse to see your worth, you know it's not about winning, it's about choosing yourself. Tell me in the comments when you've had to make that choice, and let's remind each other that peace is worth protecting. Sometimes I wonder what my daughter will remember about all of this, and more importantly, what she won't have to unlearn because I stopped it in time. When I was her age, I didn't have the language for what was happening in my family. I didn't know words like boundaries or emotional neglect. All I knew was that I often felt like I was on the outside looking in, and that no matter how hard I tried, I was never quite enough. She won't carry that, not if I can help it. A few weeks after Emma's email, my parents made one last attempt to pull us back in. It came in the form of a group text to me, Daniel, and shockingly even my daughter's iPad. Family dinner next Sunday. We can put all this behind us. We miss you. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it from her device. She didn't need to see that invitation disguised as an olive branch. When I showed Daniel, he just shook his head. "It's bait," he said, simply. And he was right, because I knew exactly what would happen if we showed up. There'd be polite smiles, then the sideways comments, then the whispered judgments when they thought we weren't listening. And before the night was over, I'd be right back where I'd spent most of my life swallowing my pride to avoid making a scene. No, not again. Instead, I sent one final message, not angry, not defensive. Just clear. We will not be attending. Please respect our decision and stop contacting us. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was from my father. "You can't keep her from her family forever." I typed back, "I'm keeping her safe. That's not the same thing." Then I silenced their numbers. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel untouchable, not because nothing could hurt me, but because I finally believed I didn't have to stand there and take it. Daniel noticed it too. One night after our daughter was asleep, we sat on the back porch with mugs of tea. "You're different," he said. "Lighter, like you're not bracing for the next hit." "I'm not," I told him, "because it can't land if I'm not standing in range." We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind I used to think only existed in other people's lives. The hum of the crickets, the cool night air, the simple knowing that our little family was intact and safe, that was everything. It struck me then that peace doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slips in quietly when you've cleared enough space for it to live. That's what I'd done, and I wasn't about to give it back. If you've ever had to create that kind of space, cutting out the noise, the chaos, the people who take more than they give, share your story below. Someone out there needs to hear that it's possible, and that on the other side of the hard choice is something worth every ounce of courage it takes to make it. That night, I slept like a stone. No replaying old arguments in my head, no rehearsing what I'd say next time, because there wasn't going to be a next time. The next morning, when my daughter bounced into the kitchen asking if we could make pancakes, it felt like a small victory. Not the kind you post about, but the kind you hold close. The kind that tells you you've finally chosen the life you want and you're not going back. For about a week, the air around us was strangely calm. There were no messages, no calls, no online posts. It was the kind of quiet that made me wonder if they had finally grudgingly accepted the reality I'd drawn for them. Then the next act began. It started with a call from the school principal on a Tuesday afternoon. "Mrs. Reynolds," he began, "we had a situation today involving a visitor trying to drop something off for your daughter. Because of the no-contact order, we didn't allow it, but I thought you should know." My stomach clenched. "Who was it?" I asked. He hesitated. "She gave a name we couldn't match to our records. No ID, wouldn't give an address. She left as soon as we told her we couldn't accept the item. But I have reason to believe—" He didn't need to finish. I already knew. When I picked up my daughter from school, she seemed unsettled. "Someone came to the office asking for me," she said. "They told me later I wasn't supposed to go. Was it because I'm in trouble?" I knelt down so we were eye level. "You're not in trouble," I told her. "Someone just forgot the rules, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again." That evening, I called the district office and the police to update our file. We added another layer to the no-contact order. If anyone attempted to approach her under false pretenses, they'd be subject to immediate legal action. I wanted to believe that would be enough to stop them. I wanted to believe they'd finally run out of ways to push against our boundaries. But deep down, I knew the truth: they weren't going to stop until they were forced to. 2 days later, a new Instagram account began tagging me in posts. The username was unfamiliar, but the content was unmistakable old childhood photos of me, grainy and faded, with captions like, "Some people forget who raised them." Then came the direct messages. "One day she'll know what you did." I didn't block the account. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who immediately contacted law enforcement. "We're past the point of warnings," he said. "We'll let the evidence speak for itself." That night, I sat on the couch after my daughter went to bed scrolling through those images. They didn't sting the way they might have once. Instead, they confirmed something I'd been feeling for months. Every desperate move they made was proof that cutting them off had been the right choice. Daniel came in from the kitchen, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You're quiet," he said, handing one to me. "They're not going to stop," I replied. He sat down beside me. "Then we don't stop either." I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had stood beside me through every escalation, every ugly revelation, without once suggesting I was overreacting. "We won't," I said. It was in that moment I realized something important. The goal was no longer to make them leave us alone. The goal was to make our life so strong, so intact, that their noise couldn't reach us. And slowly, that's exactly what we were building. If you've ever faced people who keep pushing, even when you've made your boundaries clear, you know the fight isn't always about getting them to stop. It's about making sure they can't get through. Tell me in the comments how you've done that in your own life. You never know who might need your blueprint. The threats, the manipulation, the half-baked attempts to sneak past my guard, they were all just proof that we'd finally stepped outside of their control. And that more than anything was the victory I intended to protect. I didn't have to wait long to see just how far they were willing to go. A week after the Instagram stunt, my cousin forwarded me a string of Facebook comments from a mutual relative's post. It was my mother this time, not hiding behind fake accounts, typing out her grievances for anyone to see. She didn't name me outright, but the implication was crystal clear. Some people think they're protecting their children when all they're doing is teaching them to hate family. For years, that kind of public shaming would have sent me into a spiral, either rushing to defend myself or withdrawing completely to avoid feeding the drama. This time I just screenshotted everything and sent it to my lawyer. "Add it to the file I wrote." He replied within minutes, "Got it. Paper trail is building nicely." By then, the folder had become a living thing, digital and physical, full of dates, times, screenshots, recordings. Every move they made, every attempt to twist the narrative was now documented. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure that if they ever tried to escalate legally, they wouldn't stand a chance. The shift in power was subtle but undeniable. For decades, they'd counted on my silence. Now every word they threw at me was fuel for my case, and I think they were starting to realize it. Then came the real crack in their armor. My aunt, one who'd always stayed neutral, called me out of the blue. "I've been hearing both sides," she said carefully, "and I need to tell you, I think you're doing the right thing." It caught me off guard. "Why?" "Because I remember things too," she said. "And if they're treating your daughter the way they treated you, you have every right to stop it." It was the first time a family member had acknowledged my past, without dismissing it as misunderstanding or just how they are. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words until they were out in the open. That small validation seemed to spark something. In the following days, I noticed fewer relatives engaging with my parents' posts online. Some quietly unfriended them. Others reached out to me privately, not to pry, but to let me know they were thinking of us. I wasn't naive enough to believe this meant everyone was on my side. But the silence from certain corners told me that the absolute control my parents and sister once had over the family narrative was slipping. One evening, while Daniel was making dinner, I told him about the call from my aunt. He grinned. "Cracks in the foundation," he said. "Maybe," I replied, "or maybe just one less person willing to pretend." Either way, it was a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing even in families where secrecy has been the default for generations. That night, after our daughter went to bed, I sat at my desk, opened the framed sticky note and letter, and just looked at them. Not with anger, not with sadness, just with the clarity of someone who's finally stopped asking for change from people who benefit from staying the same. If you've ever been in a situation where speaking your truth felt like shouting into the wind, know this. Even if it feels like no one's listening, someone is. And sometimes that's all it takes to start shifting the ground. Share your moment in the comments. It might be the encouragement someone else needs to hold their line. I closed the frame, turned off the light, and walked away. Their noise was still out there, but inside these walls it was quiet. And for now, that was enough. the quiet didn't last. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived in our mailbox. This one was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind you'd expect for a wedding invitation. The return address was my parents' house. I stood in the driveway, the winter sun glinting off the flap, and debated whether to even open it. Daniel joined me, drying his hands on a dish towel. "You don't have to," he reminded me. But curiosity won. Inside was a folded letter written in my mother's careful looping script. "Family is forever. We all make mistakes, but what matters is that we forgive. Don't let one bad moment erase a lifetime. Your daughter deserves her family, and you'll regret keeping her away." I read it twice. There it was again, that deliberate blurring between forgiveness and permission. No acknowledgement of what had actually happened, no ownership of their behavior, just a veiled accusation that my boundaries were the real harm. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel my heartbeat quicken. Instead, I walked straight into my office, pulled the frame off the wall, and added the letter to it side by side with the sticky note from the gift bag. Together they told the whole story, the cruelty and the denial perfectly preserved. Daniel watched me work in silence. When I stepped back, he said, "That's actually kind of brilliant." "It's my reminder," I told him, "of what I walked away from, and why." In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes in my daughter that went deeper than sleeping through the night. She laughed more freely, her shoulders no longer hunched like she was bracing for something. She started inviting her 2 new art class friends over after school. They'd spread supplies across the kitchen table, chattering about colors and shapes, unbothered by the kind of judgment she used to face in my parents' presence. One afternoon, she brought me into her room to show me something. She'd hung the fairy lights we'd bought together in a new pattern over her bed, weaving them into a spiral. "It's like a galaxy," she said proudly. "It feels like mine now." And in that moment, I knew we'd done more than remove toxic people from her life. We'd given her a space to grow without their shadows stretching over her. The real shift, though, came at the end of the school year during Family Day. Each student was allowed to invite one adult to share cookies and see their art. She chose me without hesitation. Her project was a painting abstract swirls of deep purples and pinks dotted with tiny stars. In one corner, in neat black paint, she'd written "Safe is better than big." I asked her what it meant. She grinned like it was obvious. "Big families aren't always safe. I like safe better." On the drive home, she looked out the window for a long time before turning to me. "Mom," she said softly, "you did the right thing. Even if they say you're mean, even if they never talk to us again." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything." Because in that moment, I knew she understood not the years of history, not the specifics of every slight, but the truth at the core. I had chosen her over keeping the peace. If you've ever had to make that kind of choice, you know it's not about turning your back, it's about turning toward the person who needs you most. Share in the comments if you've ever drawn that line for someone you love. Back home, I tucked her paintings safely onto the mantel. It wasn't just art, it was proof that she could name what I didn't learn to name until I was grown. And that more than anything told me I'd made the right call. By summer, the dust had mostly settled, at least on the surface. My parents had stopped calling, my sister had disappeared from social media, and the steady stream of drama that had defined so much of my life had gone eerily quiet. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means they're plotting their next move out of sight. One humid July evening, I sat on the porch watching fireflies flicker over the grass, while Daniel cleaned up dinner inside. My daughter was chasing our neighbor's golden retriever in the yard, her laughter ringing out clear and unguarded. It was one of those ordinary moments that feels extraordinary precisely because it's safe. That's when my phone buzzed. A new email notification. No subject line, no preview text, just the sender's name, Emma. Against my better judgment, I opened it. 6 words, that was all. "Are you happy now you won?" I stared at the screen, waiting for the rush of anger or guilt that used to hit me whenever she found a way to shove her voice back into my life. But nothing came, not even a twinge. Because she was wrong. I hadn't won. There was no scoreboard, no prize, no victory lap. This wasn't about beating her, it was about stepping off the field entirely, walking away from a game that had been rigged against me since childhood. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I simply dragged the message into a folder labeled unanswered, a quiet reminder that not every provocation demands a response. When Daniel came out to join me, he noticed my expression, something he asked. I shook my head. Just more proof I did the right thing. He didn't push. We sat together in the soft twilight, the cicadas buzzing in the trees, and I realized that this calm, this safety was what I'd been fighting for all along. Later that night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked if we could leave her fairy lights on, just for a little while. I agreed, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the slow pulse of colors wash over her face. She was asleep within minutes, breathing evenly, no trace of tension in her small frame. It struck me that she might never fully understand what it took to create this peace for her. She might never know about the emails, the fake accounts, the veiled threats, or the years of history that led to that crooked sticky note in a cheap gift bag. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Because the truest measure of this choice wasn't what I'd lost, it was what she'd never have to lose. If you've ever had to walk away to protect someone you love, you know the world will try to frame it as cruelty. They'll say you're overreacting, you're bitter, you're cutting yourself off. But here's the truth. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do. If you believe that, tell me in the comments, and let's remind each other that peace isn't something we wait for. It's something we build. That night, I fell asleep without wondering what their next move would be. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't just feel like I'd closed a chapter. I felt like I'd put the book back on the shelf and walked out of the library entirely. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I'd simply left and I wasn't going back. The weeks that followed were quiet. Not the brittle waiting for the next shoe kind of quiet I'd grown up with, but something else entirely. This was a quiet that felt earned, solid. Like the walls of our home were holding in warmth instead of bracing against impact. I started noticing the small things first. My daughter laughing more easily, no longer glancing over her shoulder, as if waiting for someone to correct her. Daniel humming while he made coffee in the mornings, his shoulders loose instead of tense. Even I caught myself pausing at the kitchen window sometimes just to breathe without feeling the need to prepare for a fight. The framed sticky note and letter stayed on the wall in my office. Not as trophies, not as wounds, but as markers, reminders of the line we drew and why it would never be crossed again. They sat there silently telling the story without me having to speak a word. We built new traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, Tuesday night art sessions at the kitchen table, Sunday walks through the park where my daughter would collect leaves and tell me which ones looked like they had stories. The kind of simple, sturdy moments that no one could twist or take away. I didn't miss the phone calls. I didn't miss the texts. I didn't miss the mental gymnastics of deciding whether to confront or let something slide. There was nothing left to slide. The boundary was a wall now, and I was done apologizing for it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned our backyard golden, my daughter sat beside me on the porch swing. She leaned her head against my arm and said almost to herself, "I like it better now. It's lighter." And I knew exactly what she meant. The truth is, walking away wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a better one. One where my daughter's worth is never up for debate. One where my peace isn't contingent on someone else's mood. One where love is a given, not a performance. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's this family isn't defined by blood or by tradition. It's defined by safety, respect, and the willingness to protect each other's hearts. Sometimes protecting those things means locking a door and not opening it again. And if you believe your life is worth living on your terms, that your peace is worth defending even if it costs you approval, then don't wait for permission. Build the life you want. Protect it like it's the only one you've got. Because it is. That's what I did. That's what I'll keep doing. And for the first time in my life, I don't just feel like I survived my family, I feel like I created mine.